It's almost winter. And one of the great things about winter, and there are a few, I guess, is that you can see Daniel Kingsbury's grave from Elm Street. Now you say, who's Daniel Kingsbury? Well, he owned just about all of Bradford back in the 1850s. The deed to your house probably says Daniel Kingsbury once owned it. He actually didn't own your house, he owned the land it sits on, but same thing. Anyway, today we're talking about Daniel Kingsbury. It's funny because more people know about Daniel Kingsbury's grave than they know about the man. So today we're going to change a little bit of that. Another Coffee with the Curator is about to start. We're going to start off with a picture of the grave, because everyone seems to know about Daniel Kingsbury's grave, and it seems that few people know exactly where it is. It's not difficult to get to, but you got to be willing to walk a little. This is a photograph from 1976 during the bicentennial, one of the many times that Daniel Kingsbury's grave has been restored. He was buried in 1870, and at the time, you could overlook the entire city from this gravesite. Today, however, it's pretty well grown up with trees and bushes, and it's difficult to see. Unless, of course, you're going up Elm Street in the winter when there are no leaves on the trees. If you go up Elm Street, just as you pass the hotels, look up on the hill in front of you, and you will see a white object. That's Daniel Kingsbury's grave. Now, how do you get there if you want to get there? Well, go up South Avenue, and where the wall ends is Forest Street. Turn up Forest Street and park somewhere near the top, because the rest of the way you'll be on foot. Go to the right. It's not really a street anymore. Maybe it never was. But about a quarter of a mile down on the left, you will see a set of stone steps. There probably will be a rope railing that goes up to the gravesite. That's the spot. Daniel Kingsbury is buried there, and his wife Ruby. This is a photograph of Daniel Kingsbury, probably taken about 1855. And I know I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again, but this is the only known photograph of the man. Now, Daniel Kingsbury was born in 1803 in Needham, Massachusetts. His parents were farmers, but he didn't want to be a farmer. He had visions of himself being so much more. He became a millwright, and importantly, he saved his money. Now, in 1836 and 1837, land speculations swept the country. And one of these land speculators was the United States Land Company of Boston. With 500 investors, they purchased 200,000 acres of land in McKean, Elk, and Clearfield counties. They paid $800,000 for it, and they assumed they were going to be rich. They thought there was coal here, but oh, how wrong they were. They sent a man named Colonel Levitt Little to this part of Pennsylvania. Was he a colonel? Probably not, but that was an honorary title. Colonel Little, who was appointed an agent of the company, came to Bradford, formed a house, and settled in. He also named the little settlement Littleton after himself. Unfortunately for the United States Land Company, a recession swept the United States in 1837, and the U.S. Land Company went bankrupt. They decided to sell off part of their lands, and Kingsbury, who had been saving his money and looking for such an opportunity, bought 60,000 acres of land from other members of the land organization. And this included 1/4 of Lafayette Township that we know today, and 3/4 of Bradford Township, which included Littleton, and another 100,000 acres further south in Elk and Clearfield counties. With his wife Ruby, he came to the area in 1847. And of course he ran right into Levitt Little. Now, they say there were hard feelings between Daniel Kingsbury and Levitt Little. After all, Daniel Kingsbury changed the name of the village almost immediately. People say they did not get along, that there were hard feelings over the change of the name. But seriously, do we even know this? Here at the Landmark, we've never seen any indication, any newspaper or any book or article that says Levitt Little cared one way or the other. After all, he was a paid agent of the U.S. Land Company, and in effect, Daniel Kingsbury was his new boss. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he was really ticked off. We'll never know. It's another Bradford mystery. This is a map of Bradford that was drawn in 1878 by a man named Henry Osgood, who was remembering what it looked like in 1860. Now remember, Kingsbury is still alive in 1860. And here's his sawmill at the head of Main Street. And yes, you say to yourself, Mechanic Street doesn't go there, but it did back then. South Avenue won't be named until sometime in the future. If you look further down on the left, you'll see D. Kingsbury's office and land agent on street unnamed. That street's going to be Congress Street. If you'd like to know what Kingsbury's mill really looked like, this float appeared at the 1909 Old Home Week, held in Bradford in August of that year. After Daniel Kingsbury came here, he prospered and became identified with the McKean County Bank located at Smithport. He became president of that institution and therefore became responsible for all the money. Now remember, this is a private bank. Banks aren't under the jurisdiction of the United States government. And one day, a cashier took possession of all the money in the bank and made off with it, about $85,000 of the bank's cash. They caught him in central New York, and when asked to return the money, he struck a deal with his captors. He said, "I will give you half if you let me go." So he gave them half the money that he had, and he took off. Daniel Kingsbury was responsible for the rest. He was the head of the financial institution, and it cost him about $100,000 to make up the deficiencies. It was this incident that caused him to lose his grip on business affairs, and from that time on, he frequently met with financial losses in one way or another. One bad turn, one unfortunate situation, and his whole life changed. Now, one of the things that Daniel Kingsbury owned was Quintuple Hill. It's a large hill that runs above South Avenue and overlooks the University of Pittsburgh. He thought there would be coal there, but he was wrong, and he never realized that there would be oil beneath the surface. His health suffered, and by 1870 it was apparent that Daniel Kingsbury was dying. He went to Buffalo and picked out a design for a cemetery vault. He selected his burial site on Quintuple Hill, which overlooked the city. Now, he and his wife were living on Congress Street, where later Lewis Emery would build his mansion, and still later the Dorn family would build theirs. It was said, as he lay dying, he could see the workmen building his tomb up on the hillside. He asked his nephew how the progress was going along, and the man said, "Fairly well." "Well," said Daniel Kingsbury, "they better hurry it up, or I will need it before it's done." And he actually did die before the vault was finished. And now here's the interesting part of the story, Kingsbury's grave. Is that it was vandalized several times. That's not just interesting, it's also tragic. But in 1910 was probably the worst act of vandalism yet. An oilfield worker was walking up Quintuple Hill one day and heard voices. He looked over and saw some children, some boys, ages about 7 to 10. As he got closer to the gravesite, the boys came running up to him, so excited. "We found a skeleton," said one of the boys. "Come on up and we'll show you it." They led the man to the Kingsbury vault. A small hole had been tunneled through the ground at the base, large enough so that a boy could crawl in. One lad, who seemed to be the leader of the crowd, wormed his way through the opening and dropped down onto a plank which had been placed in a slanted position against the wall. "Here's the head," he called as he passed up a human skull to one of the other boys. Like Shakespeare's gravedigger, the lad on the surface carefully examined the skull and then tried to hand it to the oilfield worker, who was standing there horrified. The gentleman said, "I don't want to see that." "Ah," said the boy on the surface to the underground boy, "send up a bigger bone." This request was complied with, and they passed a thigh bone up to the surface. This was more than the oilfield worker man could take, and he ordered the boys to get out of there in a hurry. The boy climbed out of the grave vault and explained that he saw what he thought was a coffin down there too, as well as a skeleton. Needless to say, the vault was resealed, and today there is no indication or any way into that vault. As I said at the beginning of this video, people know more about the grave than they do Daniel Kingsbury. It's hard to see the grave unless it's wintertime, but if you go up there in the summer, it's actually quite an amazing location. And if you can picture what it looked like in 1870, when you could see the entire valley below, it must have really been something. Rest in peace, Daniel Kingsbury.